Hi, I'm Father Jack. As you can see, I am a Catholic priest, but in this video I'm speaking to you as a scientist and as a professor of addiction studies. I mean, I do have another video on the religious angle, does God mind if I vape? But on this video I'm here to speak to you as an addictions counselor, as someone who teaches laws and ethics and pharmacology and things like that, someone who trains addiction counselors, and also part of an organization that certifies counselors and accredits colleges and universities in addiction studies. And I wanted to speak to you as someone who is in the profession, someone who is trying to be a healer for people who suffer with addiction. And it's very appropriate to deal with tobacco and smoking cessation as part of it, because until recently, fairly recently, I was quite addicted to tobacco. And what saved me and what I want to talk about is how electronic cigarettes can make all the difference in the world, and how we need to use this kind of tool more often. Now, we got an estimate that maybe 2 million people are using electronic cigarettes. That's a lot of people. And they seem to be using it to cut down or quit smoking. And it seems to be working. We got at least one study showing we got at least about a 24%, maybe up to a 50% success rate of people doing that with ENDDs, the government calls them, electronic nicotine delivery devices, or as we call them, e-cigs or electronic cigarettes. Well, that's incredibly high success rate, especially when you compare it to nicotine replacement therapies like the patches and the gum, which have at best an 8% success rate. So with this seemingly very high rate of success, you would think that groups like the American Cancer Society, the American Lung Association, the FDA and the government, the Heart Association, you'd think they'd all be jumping up and cheering for this. They'd be saying, we got to raise some more money, we got to do more research, we got to buy these things and hand them out to smokers. We could save thousands and thousands of lives with this technology. We got to give this stuff away to help people. But no, they're not doing that, even though they should. There's a few reasons I think why they're not doing it. One of them is they have so many ants, anti-nicotine tobacco zealots, ants. Now, these are good, sincere people. They are so passionate about helping people get off tobacco, so zealous, so passionate, that they don't, let things get in the way like, science or the facts or anything like that. And there's one way you can always spot it, someone who's an ants. They'll say things like, well, chewing tobacco is just as deadly or just as bad as smoking cigarettes. Well, they certainly have no science to back up a statement like that. I mean, common sense alone will tell you that, chewing tobacco isn't pretty, probably not good for you. Certainly the evidence that it can cause some harm, but compared to smoking cigarettes with its 4,000 deadly chemicals and association with cancer and all that, oh my God, it's not even close. So if people equate those things, they're not doing their homework. And what happens when they do that is they push people back into cigarettes. If they don't give them alternatives, they push them back into cigarettes, and they wind up achieving the exact opposite of what they want. Now, part of that is ignorance. I don't think they're looking at the latest research. Part of that is maybe some of these groups get money from the same drug companies that manufacture the pills and the gum and the patches, and well, maybe those donations might just dry up if you support what would amount to being a competing product like electronic cigarettes. So another mistake these ants make is they don't consult people like me. They don't consult experts in addiction counselors, right? They rely on bureaucrats and research and all that, and they don't have people that really know the hands-on difficulties of what it's like to break an addiction. So the ants are getting in the way. The question for us is, certainly for me as an addictions counselor, is how can I help somebody get off what is a horrible thing, smoking cigarettes? How can we do that ethically? What works? Well, at the risk of oversimplifying things, let me make a couple of very important distinctions here. One is there's a big difference between dependency and addiction. Those are two different things. You can be dependent on a substance without being addicted to it, and you can be addicted to a substance without being dependent on it. Dependency basically is your body getting used to a substance and then punishing you with all sorts of horrible side effects if you stop. So dependency results in withdrawal symptoms. Now that's different than addiction. Addiction is persistent use despite negative consequences. You know something's really bad for you, but you keep doing it anyway. That's what addiction is. So for example, you can be dependent on a drug and addicted to it. That's what heroin addicts are like. But if you're addicted to methamphetamines, there's no real dependency there. You're just addicted. Many of us, most of us, are dependent on another substance called caffeine, right? And we know we're dependent because if we stop drinking coffee, the next day we get horrible, horrible headaches, for example. Well, that's dependency. It's not addiction unless, you know, you're going to go rob a Starbucks to keep your supply going. You're just dependent on it. Now, nicotine and caffeine are in the same drug class. They're mild stimulants that produce dependency. And all of us smokers know that you can break the dependency in 24 to 48 hours, right, physically. But why do we keep going back? Why do we keep relapsing? Well, addiction is much more than dependency, right? If all it was dependency, we would have cured addiction a long time ago. No, addiction involves the same process where we stimulate certain chemicals in your brain that make you feel good. Dopamines, long story here, another video. But basically, it's not just nicotine and smoking that produces dopamines. Addiction involves all the rituals that go along with smoking. The way you open your pack and pull out your cigarettes and smell that tobacco and play with your cigarette and tap them down and using a lighter, and then who you smoke with and all the rituals involved, how you use it to deal with stress and anxiety. All that comes into play when you deal with addiction. So every addiction counselor knows that you have to do a lot more than just detoxing people to help them get through addiction. We can get anybody detoxed, but unless you give them tools to deal with stress, to deal with life as life comes, and do that successfully without the substance that you've gotten addicted to, well, you're not going to be successful. So that's why we have such a low rate with just replacing nicotine in patches and gums. I mean, those are good things, and they do help some people, but not most people. Because you get them through that first worst period of the physical withdrawal, but it's this stuff that happens after that. That's what takes forever to get over and deal with. So what we finally have is a way to do that. Electronic cigarettes. Something that can deliver nicotine, which is a fairly harmless substance. It's in the same category, as I said, as caffeine. I mean, it's toxic if you drink it, but and you don't want to get it on your skin. But as far as the amount you get in either smoking or vaping electronic cigarettes, it's pretty minimal, and that isn't where the damage comes from. You can use nicotine every day of your life. It's not going to hurt you. Well, the damage comes from the tar and the carbon monoxide and the combustion and all the other nasties that come with cigarettes. Well, we don't have that problem with electronic cigarettes. So, why aren't we using them more? Well, they say there's not enough proof that they're safe. Well, they are wrong. There's plenty of evidence. When you use the word proof, here's where the hypocrisy comes in. You know, there's no proof that smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer. Not a bit. No proof at all. What there is plenty of evidence for is that it increases your chances of getting lung cancer. But that doesn't prove it causes lung cancer. However, given all the information we have about cigarettes and smoking and all that, it's a reasonable thing to conclude that cigarettes are pretty bad for you, very damaging to your health. We don't have absolute proof. What we have is reasonable proof. The same kind of reasonable proof we have for things like evolution and other things in science that we can't absolutely prove, but is perfectly reasonable to act on and to believe and assume that it's a credible, believable truth, and hope that proof comes in later. And if what's good about science is if the evidence turns and shows something different, science will gladly switch. If only the American Cancer Society would do that. So again, how do we ethically help people quit smoking? Well, we have a concept called harm reduction. Now, I give a lot of workshops on harm reduction. I'm very often critical of the concept because it doesn't always work. Harm reduction basically says you got a problem or a disease or something like that that's so big that it's not realistic to think you're going to cure it or conquer it or even seriously reduce the problem. So let's do what we can do. So harm reduction is any positive change, anything that moves in a positive direction for reducing some of the harm of using a particular substance. Now, I can be critical of harm reduction sometimes. I mean, technically, if you give painkillers to somebody with appendicitis, well, I mean, technically that's harm reduction, but you can see you're not really doing a lot of good if that's all you do. So harm reduction is a mixed bag. Sometimes it's very useful and sometimes it's not. Now, ask yourself this question: do you support designated driver programs for restaurants? In other words, do you think it's a good idea for a restaurant to give somebody in a party who's not going to consume alcohol, give them free non-alcoholic beverages, maybe even free food, as a way to encourage and make sure that it's more likely that a totally sober person is going to drive all their friends home? Now, who would be opposed to that? Nobody. So if you support designated driver programs, you are in fact a harm reductionist. It's only a question of where you draw the line. So even some of these ants who say they're opposed to harm reduction would gladly support harm reduction in other areas. So perhaps they're not thinking it through all the way. So, what are the ethical questions? Well, we have 3 ethical standards that we always have to look at when we do any kind of treatment, any kind of way to help people. The first one is called non-malfeasance. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. In other words, whatever you do, don't make it worse. Well, so we have to ask the question, is giving people electronic cigarettes make it worse? Clearly not. If you look at all the studies, and you have to go to Europe to look at that stuff, all the evidence keeps trickling in that it's safe. We can't find anything harmful, and there is absolutely no evidence that says it's harmful. Now, is it potentially dangerous? Yes. You know, I wouldn't want a kid playing with nicotine. You want to keep that away from your pets and your children because it's a dangerous, poisonous substance. Not when it's vaped, but just having it around. So we got to be careful. It's not perfect because we don't have all the data. A lot more research has to be done. But all the indications is that it's safe. Propylene glycol and vegetable glycol seems and flavoring seem to be the basic ingredients. Well, propylene glycol is found in cake mix and asthma inhalers. I mean, it's a reasonably safe product. Chemists will tell you that. Research biologists will tell you that. Again, we don't have all the data we need, but we have enough to make that reasonable conclusion that it is far safer to use electronic cigarettes than it would be to keep on smoking. So the fact that, gosh, some of us enjoy electronic cigarettes as part of it, well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You know, the state of California gets gazillions amounts of dollars from cigarette taxes, which a lot of which they use to try to prevent tobacco and smoking. And they have a thing called a smokers helpline where they'll counsel you and be your cheerleader and help you through that, which is all good stuff. But they won't endorse in any way, shape, or form electronic cigarettes because, get this, they have a policy where they don't support any technique that involves a hand-to-mouth motion. A hand-to-mouth motion. That's why they got it backwards, folks. That is one of the reasons exactly why electronic cigarettes are a good thing. Because that hand-to-mouth motion is part of what addiction is. And if you can replace the hand-to-mouth motion of sticking a cigarette in your mouth with something that's a lot less harmful, and has something delicious like raspberry mojito, well, then for God's sake, what's wrong with that? Nothing. That's a good thing. Even if it continues a dependency on nicotine, that's pretty harmless. Nicotine doesn't cause cancer. Nicotine produces dependency, but so what? So does caffeine, right? Unless you drink the stuff, it's not really going to hurt you. So, if replacing smoking a cigarette with something that involves hand-to-mouth motion, something that kicks out dopamines in the brain, some pleasure, some way to help deal with stress, some way to help deal with anxiety, and it does it in a fairly safe way, it doesn't cause damage to others. There's one study that shows there's not even nicotine in exhaled vapor. Well then, that's got to be a good thing. So primum non nocere, first do no harm, is one ethical principle we have to follow. The most important one is client welfare, or beneficence, if you want the million-dollar word. Beneficence means we know it's good for people, and certainly getting people off cigarette smoking is a good thing. And then the third ethical principle that matters here is called autonomy, meaning as professionals in the helping and healing fields, we are required ethically to let competent adults make their own decisions. And so people that want to ban e-cigs aren't doing that. That's unethical. No. The solution to all of this is something called informed consent. With informed consent, we can tell adult people that vape electronic cigarettes, help them understand the risks, although they're pretty minimal, understand it's not a perfect thing, understand that the best thing you can do, of course, is not vape or smoke. But if vaping helps you stay off cigarettes, it seems to be of little harm. Yes, they're going to say, oh, we found diethylene glycol once in one small batch of liquid for smoking cigarettes. Well, That's from the FDA. Folks, it's junk science. They found such a small amount. It's of insignificance, right? We have FDA regulations that allow a certain amount of insects in your beans and rice, right? Your canned vegetables can have a certain amount of rat feces in them. They allow that because they say it's such a tiny amount, it's not going to everybody. Well, they didn't say that about diethylene glycol, which is a toxic substance, and it is found in antifreeze, but so is water, okay? You know, every night for 7 hours, I vape on a machine that pushes a chemical into my lungs, forces it into my lungs, at least a pint of it every night, and the chemical it forces in there is dihydrogen monoxide. I get at least a pint of it in my lungs every night. Is that a bad thing? Dihydrogen monoxide? Well, no, it's not a bad thing at all. I have something called sleep apnea, and this machine forces air into my lungs. It uses water vapor, and that's what dihydrogen monoxide is water. And that helps me breathe easier and stops lots of bad things happening from not breathing correctly. So that's medicinal. And of course there's nothing wrong with that. So stop using the big scare words. Use good science instead. Use consenting adults. Respect autonomy. So what's the ethical approach? My God, we have to give electronic cigarette technology to anyone who could benefit from it, any smoker. We have to keep researching how these things work, how to make them better. We need maybe to regulate batteries and purity of e-liquids and things to make sure these things are as safe as possible. But, my God, let's not ban them. Let's give them away. I know as an addiction counselor, I'm going to do everything I can because I know the day is coming when they're going to ban cigarettes from treatment centers. I know they've done that in New York. If we're not ready to help our people get through smoking withdrawal at the same time they're getting through other problems, they're going to walk out. They're going to be miserable and will achieve just the exact opposite. So my profession needs to be ready for that, and people that get lots of money from the public to help fight tobacco need to get on board, to accept the science that's there, call for more research, but for God's sake, please help us, not hurt us, not get in the way. Help us promote the concept of harm reduction, which reduces the damage without causing any side effects. You know, if they say to you, well, people get addicted to e-cigarettes, no, they don't. There's no such thing as an addiction to electronic cigarettes because, remember, addiction is persistent use despite negative consequence. What's the negative consequence of being hooked on electronic cigarettes? There are none. There's, you know, unless your family's starving to death so you can vape, there's no negative consequences there. So it doesn't even meet the criteria of addiction. So people that are opposing electronic cigarettes need to do their homework. They need to look at all the research, and they need to look at the bottom line, which is, do people get better? And they do. Thank you for watching this. I have to admonish you to do good and avoid evil. Okay, there's the priest part coming in. But don't be afraid to vape. Don't be afraid to use anything that will promote a positive change. And actually, I would go so far as to say it's not just harm reduction, it's actually treatment, a tool of treatment to stop, if you want to use the word cure, tobacco addiction. God bless you.